Hey friends, Nerdy Pastor is back here and was going to do a real short video today as I just completed an 8-part study at my church on Reformed Eschatology, and I thought I would just give some good recommendations on different sources that you might want to consult as you grow in your own understanding of the Bible's teaching on the end times. And of course, there are many popular levels of that are out there. And I've done a video on dispensationalism, along with a video on Presbyterians and Bible church members. And those videos you can consult to think about how we think about eschatology a little differently and how it informs us a little differently and how we kind of do church. Okay. So I won't get into all the differences of that. I'm just simply here going to recommend to you some really good resources on a reformed understanding of the end times, and just thought to recommend some sections of a book as well, as there are some systematics out there that are just absolutely outstanding on a concise yet comprehensive understanding of the end times. And I also recommend a Lutheran systematics to you as well, that will help you if you are wanting to understand the other Reformation tradition that kind of started it all, and their viewpoints on the end times as well. So I think without fail, the two resources I think that are just the best, that are the most concise and comprehensive in my view, are Anthony Hoekema's great and in fact somewhat famous book, The Bible in the Future. And this has been recommended before, I think, on this channel. But this book is, I just think it's probably one of the most outstanding books on understanding in an up-to-date fashion all the issues that are concerning the end times from a Reformed perspective. It has a section in there, of course, on dispensational premillennialism, and it really attacks the issues of the end times from the perspective of biblical theology, which is, what is the story of the Bible? How does this connect together with the story of the Bible? Which is really what Reformed eschatology is trying to do, connecting the beginning and the end, and understanding also that the end is actually implanted in a rooted way in the beginning. So that, in the sense, the end is only the fruition of the beginning. So in some ways, that's how the Reformed, especially Jonathan Edwards here, can say that grace is the beginning of glory, and glory is the perfecting of grace. There's that organic relationship between the beginning and the end. And grace and glory, of course, are speaking more systematically, whereas we would say creation and consummation would be the terms we would want to use for the more linear, horizontal understanding of the biblical narrative per se. Okay, so Anthony Hoekema's The Bible in the Future is just incredible, an incredible book, I think. Another book that kind of works in the same vein, kind of does some of the same things, I think, as Hoekema's book, but in a much more contemporary. Even the Hoekema's book, I think, was written in the 70s, I believe, is Cornelius Venema's The Promise of the Future. This book is, in fact, I think, a little bit longer winded, in a good way, on opposite views of the millennium than the amillennial position that he holds and expounds. Does a really good job on talking about why not premillennialism, which goes further into depth than Hoekema's book. So it's a little bit more apologetic in nature, I think, than Hoekema's book. Hoekema's might be a little bit more comprehensive in a sense, but Venema's book, I think, does a really good job, especially in kind of a premillennial world and Christianity out there. That's the majority kind of perspective. Certainly the lay level, kind of the popular level perspective. He does a really good and very ironic job of saying, no, I don't think the Bible teaches this. This is why we want to hold to this perspective of not just the millennial kingdom, but all these other things too. And I love how he really goes after it, so pastoral, so winsome, but yet firm. So I think my favorite book of all, in just kind of a comprehensive, touches all the issues, but yet with an apologetic note in it, is Venema's book. So I think if you're going to get two books, you want to get Venema and Hoekema's book, Bible in the Future. Venema also has a book called Christ and the Christ in the Future, I believe, as well. That's kind of not an abridgment, but a kind of a summarization of the promise in the future in a more readable, student level fashion. So I think you can get that paperback, and it's $15 or $16, but that's a more student-friendly version of this kind of, I wouldn't say it's super academic, but it's more academic book, okay? Some other sources that I think are really, really good if you want to go deeper and a little bit more kind of comprehensive across the board with other sources is, let me recommend to you first, I think, let's go with, there's 5 here sources I would recommend for specific issues in the end times. First, you have to go, sorry about that. First, you have to go with Cornelius, no, not Cornelius Venema, but Gerardus Voss's actually book, Reformed Dogmatics. Reformed Dogmatics here is super good. This is the 5th volume. It goes over eschatology, and eschatology is obviously always visited last, but his first volume talks about creation with that consummatory keynote in it. This is really, really good in a kind of scholastic fashion. I love Voss. Now, he's got other books that are super important, that are challenging biblical theology, books like the Pauline Eschatology and others, biblical theology. But this one, I like this one a lot because of how clear and concise he is on the points of doctrine. These are just lecture notes, I think, from his time at, maybe it was Calvin Seminary, I think is what it's called today, but I can't remember. I'm probably off on that. But his time, his lecture notes there before he was at Princeton, it might have been when he was at Princeton too. I cannot remember the dates of his times at those seminaries, but this is just fantastic. I mean, eschatology proper, I think takes up, chapter 6. It's about 70 pages. It's incredible. It's just point after point is just magnificent. So I would recommend Voss for kind of diving into every point of doctrine with greater emphasis and clarity. I've got so many books up here. I've got books falling over, hitting my computer and all sorts of stuff. I've run out of room. This is the plight of a pastor, I guess. Another one I would recommend for the reality of the judgment and the judge, we call the final judgment. I love Robert Louis Dabney. Robert Louis Dabney's understanding of the final judgment and the judge, his systematic theology, and it's in the very last section here, his last few lectures that cover the general judgment and eternal life, and then hell and conscious kind of hell torments. These last couple chapters, I mean, his whole volume's outstanding. It's all good. But I really, really like the way he brings it all to consummation and really explicates in the final judgment the reality of the supremacy of the judge Jesus Christ. And there's some pastoral riffs in this that are just second to none. And they're just fascinatingly illuminating. And honestly, I've wept reading some of it before. It's so beautiful and so poignant and just touching to the believer who is approaching a crisis of the bar of God's tribunal. And so there's some sort of just masterful things in Dabney's treatment in the last couple lectures of his systematic theology. Could not go without mentioning William. Goodness gracious, hitting everything today. William G.T. Shedd's what happens when you got all the systematic books up here. You knock stuff around here. But William G.T. Shedd's just magisterial 3-volume into one. It got republished in 1 volume. I think it was like 20 years ago. And first of all, I've said this before, probably one of my favorite systematic theologies in the republished format because of the way it guides you. Again, Gomes here, who does that, Southern Baptist Seminary professor, I think, of church history. He just does a masterful job of putting it together, giving the introduction, and leading you through the 3 volumes that he has condensed into one. And it might not be the first time it's been condensed into one, but it's a lot easier to read being in one. The reason I bring up Shedd here is because of his fascinatingly accurate, terrifying treatment of the doctrine of hell. And he's got, of course, that famous book, The Doctrine of the Endless Punishment, which is in some sense its own work, but it's not a republication of this. Just so you understand, there are 2 pages on heaven in this book. 2. There are like 41 pages on hell. I think it shows you that, again, this is because I believe, if I'm understanding this right, that the doctrine of heaven, in a sense, is already being explained in the salvation of a Christian, because heaven has already come down, because heaven is already being meted out with receiving the work of Christ on the cross, in the resurrection of his body, to never die again, as Romans 6:10 says. And so, in a sense, it's kind of like he's already discussed this at length in the previous section on salvation. So hell gets a 40+ page treatment here. The idea of conscious torment, eternal torment, never-ending judgment, degrees of hell, all these things, especially the conscience, the mental acuteness of the conscious torment, is made very clear here. I think, again, it's probably the best out there, in a traditional Reformed vein. So the doctrine of hell, specifically the final chapter of this book, is absolutely outstanding. Let's see if I can avoid hitting my computer and knocking all my books over here with the last few here. Herman Bavinck's 4th volume here of his Reformed Dogmatics. Everything is good in Bavinck. Everything is magisterial in Bavinck. But he is well known for his treatment of the new heavens and the new earth. This is on page, I think it's on page 321. Maybe I'm wrong on that. Nope. 721. Nope. 715. So the renewal of creation. Again, everything in here on the end times, on the millennial kingdom, everything is super, super good. But what I really like about his treatment on the end times is his stuff on the new heavens and the new earth, especially. It's really, really good. And that's where Venema and Hoekema, coming out of the Dutch Reformed tradition, are going to really kind of pull more contemporary thought and reflection from. That's where Berkhoff gets a lot of his thought from too. So, Bavinck's kind of, in a sense, the catalyst for all that. So his 4th volume there, okay, Holy Spirit, Church, and New Creation. So the New Creation part is just dynamite. 4th volume there. Really, really good. And then if you were a Baptist, Reformed Baptist, of course, there are many good volumes from a Reformed Baptist perspective, but one that I found super helpful, clear, and pastoral was John Dagg's Manual of Theology. And he's got just a beautiful section at the very end, on heaven. Then he goes into hell, and then he goes into a kind of a conclusion of both. That's very pastoral and very lively. Maybe 30 pages at the end, but really, really it feels a little bit like John Bunyan without all the without without all the angst and the anger towards the papists. It's kind of like Bunyan without all the Bunyan, at the very end there. But there's just this pastoral graciousness, but real pointedness to the teachings pastorally. So I love John Dagg. I also love Thomas Watson and others, but Dagg's a little bit more. He's a little bit less scholastic. He's a little bit more pastoral in his writings. And then I think the last thing I would share with you all, if you want to know the other Reformed tradition, of course, the Reformation tradition, the Lutheran school, which in a sense is the first Reformation, and then the Reformed tradition, of course, is kind of, in a sense, the second generation of that Reformation. So we're kind of on the heels of Luther and many of his followers at that time, early 16th century. Melanchthon and others. Melanchthon comes a little bit later, but the overlap with Calvin, of course, not super, super close, but there's an overlap there. So the Lutheran tradition has a lot to say about this too, so we don't want to forget them. So I'm going to bend down here for a second and show you this. There's Francis Pieper, there's Martin Chemnitz, there's a lot of great, of course, Luther studies himself, his sermons and everything as well, but what I have found to be the most helpful and the most dynamic is Johann Gerhard's Theological Commonplaces. And Concordia has been publishing these bad boys for a while now, and they are super expensive, but they are so worth having if you are a geek out to the max kind of person, on the teachings of the Reformation. So his 2 volume, again, they're not 2 volumes, there's many, many, many volumes. His commonplaces span, I think, through, let's see on here, 33 commonplaces. So commonplaces 30 through 33, okay? So 30 through 31 is the resurrection on the resurrection of the dead, and on the last judgment. Okay, so like I said, not super crazy thick, but these are commonplaces. So these are theological loci. This is systematic theology. Okay, and then commonplaces 32 and 33 is on the end of the world. That's where they're going to get the new heavens and the new earth teaching there. Okay, which they're going to typically teach a destruction of the earth and the heavens, and then almost a brand new creation, different from the reform there. And there's actually quite a bit of nuanced difference between our teachings and on hell. I mean, so they're not letting up on that. I mean, on hell, there's a huge long teaching on hell. I mean, the teaching on hell is 100. So he takes out William Shedd by quite a bit here. The teaching on hell is 170 pages long. So just so you understand, there's another tradition in there that has a lot to say. That'd be good to consult if you want to dig down deeper into the Reformation traditions, plural, okay? But again, I would just kind of center your attention if you really want to read some very good, concise, and comprehensive volumes on Reformed eschatology. You couldn't do much better than, I think, Venema's The Promise of the Future and The Bible in the Future by Hokema. Those two, I think, are probably the best, most reliable across the board. Whereas, again, the systematic theologians are going to be outstanding, but they're dealing with all the loci. They're focusing on the body of divinity. They're not focusing as much on the specific loci here. But again, there's some areas like Shedd on hell, Bavinck on the new creation, Dabney on the final judgment is super good. Then you've got, John Dagg pastorally from the Reformed Baptist tradition down there. And then, of course, Johannes Vos talking about the end times from this kind of scholastic preciseness. There's a quote in there about the inside-outsideness of heaven and hell that's just incredible, talking about how God creates the outer realm too, for a place. There's a place for the damned. There's a place for the condemned. So just all of them are good, but just for entry point, be good for you to start probably with Anthony Hokema. I think first would be the best, then Cornelius Venema. After that, then if you want to read those others, you can if you've got their volumes. Okay, hope these resources for Reformed eschatology help. Try to avoid the Tim LaHaye series if you can. All right, signing off.